My father tried to control my life from childhood to adulthood, warning me about my husband who eventually betrayed me. I ignored him and only now realize his love and wisdom. I grew up with a father who never gave me an easy moment. From the outside, people would say he was strict or traditional, but to me, it often felt suffocating. He always had an opinion about what I wore, who I talked to, how late I stayed out, even what books I should be reading. Nothing was ever left to my choice. As a child, I would roll my eyes and storm off whenever he'd correct me, and my mother often had to step in to calm the tension at the time. I thought he just wanted to control me. When I was 10 or 11, I remember him refusing to let me go to a sleepover at my best friend's house because he didn't trust the situation. I screamed, slammed my bedroom door, and cried into my pillow, thinking he was ruining my life. He stood outside the door, his voice steady but firm, saying, "One day you'll understand why I do this. It's not because I don't love you. It's because I do." Even in small, everyday things, he tried to teach lessons. If I spent my allowance too quickly, he wouldn't give me more. If I got into trouble at school, he made me face the consequences instead of shielding me. Back then, I hated him for it. I wanted a cool dad, someone who let me do whatever I wanted. Instead, I got a father who seemed determined to challenge me at every turn. Looking back now, I realize those early years set the tone for our entire relationship. He was protective to the point of frustration, and I was rebellious to the point of defiance. But behind every rule, every no, there was a strange kind of consistency in how much he cared. I just didn't see it then. I only saw control. Not love. By the time I was 16, I thought I knew everything about life. My father's constant warnings and strict rules only fueled my determination to prove him wrong. So when I met Ethan, not his real name, a boy from my high school who was charming, a little reckless, and absolutely nothing like the kind of person my father would approve of, I was instantly drawn to him. Ethan smoked occasionally, skipped classes when he felt like it, and never cared much about rules. To me, that was exciting. To my father, it was a nightmare. The first time Ethan came to pick me up from our house, I'll never forget the look on Dad's face. His jaw tightened, his eyes narrowed, and before Ethan could even greet him, my father said, "This one is trouble. You'll regret this." I was furious that we fought that night. I yelled at my father, "You don't know him. You just judge everyone before you even meet them." He didn't shout back. He just stood there, calm but unshaken, and replied, "I don't need to know him. I can see enough. Trust me, daughter, one day you'll remember this conversation." Of course, I didn't listen. The more my father disapproved, the closer I clung to Ethan. It felt like us against the world, me and my boyfriend versus the controlling parent. Every secret text message, every late-night phone call felt like rebellion, and that gave it even more thrill. Looking back now, I realize how blind I was. Ethan wasn't bad all the time. He could be sweet, funny, and make me feel like I was the only girl in the room, but there were red flags everywhere. He lied easily. He flirted with other girls even in front of me, and he had a temper that sometimes scared me. But back then, I refused to acknowledge any of it. I only saw freedom and independence from my father's control. That I remember one specific evening when Dad caught us sneaking back after curfew. He didn't yell. He just looked at me with such disappointment and said quietly, "You deserve someone who respects you. And this boy does not." His words stung, not because I believed him, but because deep down, part of me knew he was right. Still, I chose to ignore that part. By the time I turned 20, Ethan and I had been together for nearly 4 years. Everyone around me, friends, relatives, even my mother, had gently tried to warn me about him, but no one's voice was louder than my father's. His warnings became almost predictable. Every time Ethan disappointed me, Dad's words echoed in the background. "You deserve better. He'll break your heart." At that age, though, I felt trapped between pride and stubbornness. I didn't want to admit that my father had been right. To me, leaving Ethan would mean admitting defeat, proving my dad's authority over my choices, and I simply couldn't give him that satisfaction. So instead, I doubled down on the relationship. Ethan asked me to marry him when I was 21. It wasn't a romantic proposal. It was at a cheap diner after we'd had an argument earlier that day. He slid a small box across the table almost like a peace offering, muttering, Let's just do this already. I should have hesitated. I should have realized that the lack of thought or care said everything about where we stood. But instead, I said yes immediately, almost defiantly. When I brought the news home, my father's face darkened. He didn't shout, but the silence in the room was louder than any argument we'd ever had. Finally, he said, "If you marry this man, you will regret it every day. I hope I'm wrong, but I know I'm not." I remember throwing back, "Why can't you ever just be happy for me? This is my life, not yours." My father's eyes softened for a moment, and he quietly said, "Because it's my job to protect you, even when you hate me for it." The wedding itself was small, rushed, and far from the fairy tale I had once imagined. Ethan didn't want to spend money on it, and honestly, I agreed because I thought love was enough. My father showed up, though I could tell he was forcing himself to sit through it. I caught him wiping his eyes during the vows, and for a fleeting second, I thought maybe he had accepted my decision. Later, I realized those tears weren't of joy, they were grief. He knew what was coming, even if I didn't. Our first year of marriage was rocky. Ethan was careless with money, quick to anger, and distant whenever things didn't go his way. He refused to settle into responsibility, often staying out late, coming home with excuses that made less and less sense. Every phone call with my father turned into a debate. Dad would ask, "Are you happy?" And I would snap, "Stop asking me that. I'm fine." But the truth was, I wasn't fine, and he knew it. Even then, when things started crumbling, I refused to run back to my father and admit he had been right all along. My pride wouldn't let me. Instead, I buried myself deeper in a marriage that was already showing cracks, telling myself it was just a rough patch that we'd eventually get through. Even after I got married, my father never stopped voicing his opinions. He didn't do it with cruelty or aggression, at least not always, but with a kind of relentless persistence that made it impossible to ignore him. Every conversation we had eventually circled back to Ethan, to my choices, to the life I was building. That I remember one dinner at my parents' house, not long after the wedding. My father sat at the head of the table, silent through most of the meal, while Ethan talked about some new business idea he had. Ethan had these ideas all the time, half-baked schemes that never went anywhere. This one was about investing money we didn't even have into some friend's startup. My father finally put down his fork, looked Ethan dead in the eye, and said, "That's not a business plan, that's a fantasy. And you're dragging my daughter into your fantasies." Ethan's jaw tightened, and the room grew tense. I quickly snapped, "Dad, please, can we just have one meal without you criticizing him?" My father didn't break eye contact with Ethan and calmly replied, "I'm not criticizing him. I'm telling the truth. One day you'll see it." Mom tried to ease the tension, changing the subject, but the damage was already done. Ethan barely spoke for the rest of the evening, and when we got into the car, he muttered under his breath, "Your dad hates me." And he was right. My father didn't hide it, not even for my sake. But it wasn't only Ethan he commented on. He had opinions on everything: how we spent money, where we lived, even the way I planned my career. Once, when I told him Ethan convinced me to quit a stable job so I could support his dream, my father lost his composure completely. He raised his voice for the first time in months, shouting, "You're throwing your life away for this man. You had security, independence, and you traded it for his empty promises." I yelled back, tears streaming down my face, "Why can't you just let me live my life? I'm an adult now. Stop trying to control me." Dad's face softened again, but his words carried weight. "You think I'm trying to control you, but I'm trying to save you. I've lived long enough to see where these choices lead. You may not see it now, but one day, you'll wish you had listened." At the time, I thought he was being overbearing, maybe even cruel. It felt like he was constantly rooting against me, waiting for me to fail just so he could say, "I told you so." What I didn't understand back then was that he wasn't waiting for me to fail. He was desperately trying to prevent it. But in my stubbornness, I only pulled further away. Each lecture, each warning, felt like another chain I needed to break free from. And every time I told him to stay out of my life, I thought I was winning some invisible battle for independence. In reality, I was losing something much bigger: the chance to see that he was the only one truly fighting for me. At first, I convinced myself that the tension between Ethan and my father was the only real problem. If Dad could just accept Ethan, then things would settle down. But once we were truly on our own, away from my parents' house, living in an apartment we could barely afford, the cracks started showing. And this time, there was no one to blame but us. Ethan's business ventures turned out to be nothing more than pipe dreams. He had endless enthusiasm, I'll give him that. But enthusiasm doesn't pay rent. Month after month, the bills piled up, and every conversation seemed to end with him saying, "Just trust me, babe. I'm close to making it big." I wanted to believe him, but the only thing big that arrived were the late fees and debt. Collector's letters that I picked up extra shifts at work, sacrificing my own ambitions to keep us afloat. I remember sitting at the kitchen table, balancing a stack of unpaid bills, while Ethan paced the room talking about buying into a cryptocurrency project his friend swore was a guaranteed win. I snapped at him. "We don't even have enough for groceries next week, and you want to gamble on another one of your friend's ideas?" He just waved me off like I didn't understand. Slowly, the resentment began to fester. I would lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, replaying my father's words. "One day you'll see it." I hated that voice in my head, hated that. It was starting to sound less like criticism and more like the truth. And then came the whispers, the late nights Ethan had to work, but couldn't explain what exactly he was working on. The missed calls, the perfume that wasn't mine, lingering on his shirt. I ignored the signs at first, because admitting them felt like admitting my father was right about everything. The fights became routine. He accused me of being negative, of not supporting his dreams, while I accused him of dragging us down into a life I never wanted. Sometimes we'd scream until neighbors knocked on the walls. Other times we'd sit in silence, so heavy it felt like the apartment itself was suffocating us. Looking back now, that's when the marriage truly started, unraveling. Not with the affair itself, but with the constant erosion of trust, stability, and respect. We weren't partners. We were two enemies trapped in the same sinking ship, both too proud to admit the truth. And the worst part? Deep inside, I could feel my father's warnings echo louder with each passing date. It happened on a Wednesday evening, a night that has burned into my memory like a scar. I had just finished another exhausting double shift at work. My whole body ached, but I forced myself to stop at the grocery store because, as usual, Ethan hadn't thought to pick up even the basics. I carried the bags up the 3 flights of stairs to our apartment, sweat sticking my shirt to my back, irritation bubbling with every step. When I unlocked the door, I expected to see him sprawled on the couch, maybe with some new get-rich scheme pulled up on his laptop. Instead, the apartment was filled with muffled laughter. A woman's laugh, not mine. For a moment, I froze, my fingers gripping the plastic bags so tight they dug into my skin. I wanted to believe I was imagining it. Maybe the TV was on, maybe he was watching a show. But then I heard it again, softer this time, followed by Ethan's voice saying something in that low, teasing tone he never used with me anymore. I pushed the door open, and there they were. A woman sitting far too comfortably on my couch, her hair a mess like she had been running her hands through it nervously, or maybe passionately. Ethan, red-faced, looking like a child caught with his hand in the cookie jar. The groceries slipped from my arms, hitting the floor with a thud that made them both jerk around. Oranges rolled across the hardwood, one stopping right in front of Ethan's foot. The silence that followed was unbearable. "Really?" I managed to choke out, my voice shaking with a mix of rage and heartbreak. In our home, Ethan scrambled to his feet, stammering, "It's not what it looks like." The woman grabbed her purse and practically bolted, muttering something about not knowing he was married. I didn't even bother looking at her. My eyes were locked on him. "All those nights you said you were working. All those excuses." I spat, tears burning at the corners of my eyes, but refusing to fall. This is what I was supporting? This is what I was breaking my back for. He tried to reach for me, but I stepped back. The touch that once felt safe now made my skin crawl. The walls of the apartment seemed to close in, every unpaid bill, every broken promise, every fight flashing through my mind at once. And behind it all, like a drumbeat, my father's voice, "You'll regret this choice." That night didn't just break my marriage. It broke the last illusion I had built around Ethan, the last shred of denial I had clung to. It was the point. of no return. In the silence that followed the divorce, my father's voice seemed to haunt every corner of my mind. It wasn't cruel, it wasn't mocking, it was steady, calm, and painfully right. I would find myself washing dishes, staring at the chipped edges of the plate in my hand, and suddenly remember him saying, "If a man really loves you, he'll never make you feel like a guest in your own life." I used to roll my eyes at his sayings, dismiss them as outdated wisdom from someone who didn't understand the world I was growing up in. But now, I saw the truth in every single word. Ethan had made me feel exactly like that. A guest, a shadow, someone just tolerated so long as I didn't challenge his control. That I remembered another fight, years ago, when I stormed out of the house. After he tried to stop me from sneaking out to see Ethan, I screamed at him, "You can't control me forever." His face softened in a way that I didn't understand then. He didn't yell back, didn't forbid me again. He just sighed and said, "One day, you'll see I wasn't trying to control you. I was trying to protect you from pain you can't yet imagine." At the time, I thought he was being dramatic. Now those words sat like stones in my chest. Even beyond Ethan, I began to realize how many other things my father had been right about. He warned me about friends who would disappear the moment things got hard, just like the ones who stopped calling once the divorce news spread. He warned me not to hand over all my finances to someone else, just like the trap I'd fallen into. With Ethan, he even warned me that my own stubbornness could one day be my downfall. And God, how right he had been. Nights were the hardest. I would lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, and replay conversations with him, ones I had long forgotten. His laugh, his serious tone when he was worried, the way he'd call me kiddo, even when I was already a grown woman. He had always been my anchor, even when I fought against the rope. And now, with him gone for years, I realized I would have given anything, to hear him say, "I told you so," just one more time. What hurt most wasn't that he was right. It was that I never admitted it to him while he was alive. I never swallowed my pride long enough to say, "Dad, you were looking out for me. You loved me in a way I didn't understand." Now I carried that unspoken truth like a scar that would never fade. The haze of anger and stubbornness lifted with the years. I began piecing together all the times my father had shown his love through actions I once resented. When I was younger, I saw every gesture as interference, every rule as a cage. But looking back, I could see the careful planning, the quiet sacrifices, and the deep, unwavering concern that wove through everything he did. I remembered the summer before college when he insisted I learn how to budget properly. At the time, I rolled my eyes and snapped at him, saying I wasn't some child who needed lessons. He sat me down anyway, showing me how to track expenses, how to save for unexpected emergencies. I ignored most of it then, but as I sat, years later staring at my empty bank account after Ethan had stripped it clean, I realized my father hadn't been lecturing. He had been arming me. There was also the way he constantly questioned Ethan, not out of cruelty, but because he sensed what I refused to see. When Ethan skipped important family dinners or brushed off my father's attempts at conversation, Dad would pull me aside and ask, "Does this man truly respect you?" I hated those questions, thought he was trying to sabotage my relationship. Now I knew he was the only one brave enough to say what everyone else must have been thinking. Even in smaller moments, his intentions shone through. Like the nights I stayed out late in high school, he would wait in the living room with the lights on, pretending to read a newspaper. I thought he was just nosy, but now I knew he had stayed awake because he couldn't sleep until he was sure I was safe. Or the times he argued with me about career choices, pushing me toward stability instead of chasing fleeting passions. I thought he was crushing my dreams, but in reality, he wanted to ensure I'd never depend on anyone to survive. Every memory was tinged with both shame and gratitude. I wished I could go back, just once, to stand in front of him without the armor of teenage defiance and tell him I understood. That his control wasn't about power, it was about love. He had wanted to shield me from the very fate I had walked right into, blind and reckless. It dawned on me that his greatest gift wasn't just the lessons themselves, but the proof that someone loved me enough to fight for my future, even when I screamed that I didn't want it. He had carried the burden of being the bad guy, in my eyes, because he valued my well-being more than my approval. That realization hit harder than any betrayal Ethan had dealt me. Because Ethan never fought for me, not the way my father did. There are nights when I lie awake staring at the ceiling, my chest heavy with the kind of silence only grief can bring. In those moments, I catch myself reaching for my phone as if I could still call him, as if he'd pick up on the second ring with that familiar, steady voice. I imagine what I'd say first. Would I apologize for all the shouting matches, for every slammed door and harsh word? Or would I simply whisper, "Dad, you were right," and let the tears do the rest? The regret hits hardest in the smallest, most ordinary parts of life. When I cook dinner, I remember how he used to tease me for burning pasta, and I'd yell at him to mind his own business. Now, standing in my quiet kitchen, I ache for him to barge in and correct me, to annoy me with his endless advice. When I walk past the hardware store, I see fathers teaching their daughters how to fix things, and I think about the times I rolled my eyes when he tried to teach me the same. What I wouldn't give now to sit on the porch with him, tools scattered around, listening to his patient explanations. The emptiness is sharpest during family gatherings. There's always that empty chair, the one he used to fill with his booming laugh and sly comments. Sometimes, when everyone else is talking, I catch myself scanning the room, searching for him, expecting to see his face. But he isn't there, and he won't ever be. That finality is unbearable. What tears me apart most is knowing I never gave him the closure he deserved. I never told him how much I truly appreciated everything he did. I never admitted that his relentless love, though suffocating at times, was exactly what shaped me, what gave me the backbone to survive even when my marriage collapsed. The words stayed locked in my chest, and now they'll stay there forever, echoing in the silence he left behind. That I wish he could see me now, bruised but still standing. I wish he could meet the woman I've become, even if it took heartbreak and betrayal to open my eyes. I know he'd still scold me for ignoring his advice, but I also know he'd pull me into a hug, hold me tight, and remind me that I'm stronger than I think. That's what I miss most, the way he made me feel safe, no matter how chaotic life became. Grief has a cruel way of reshaping memories. It turns old arguments into daggers of guilt and forgotten moments into treasures you'd give anything to relive. And every day, I'm reminded that love, even when misunderstood, leaves the deepest imprint. His presence may be gone, but his voice lingers inside me, guiding me still. It's impossible not to compare the two men who shaped my life. The father who loved me relentlessly, and the husband who chose betrayal over commitment. My father's love was steady, even when it felt overbearing. Every warning, every scolding, every push to do better came from a place of care. He wanted to protect me from mistakes, to guide me toward a life of security and dignity. Contrast that with my ex-husband, whose charm masked deceit, and whose promises crumbled under the weight of his selfishness. While my father intervened to steer me away from harm, my husband actively created chaos, making choices that shattered our home and left me questioning my own judgment. I remember nights when my father's words would echo in my mind. "You'll regret ignoring what I said." At the time, I would have laughed, rolling my eyes at his persistence. But now, after the divorce, I understand he was right, not just about my husband, but about life itself. The emotional disparity is staggering. With my father, even when I rebelled, I knew I was seen and loved unconditionally. With my ex-husband, I felt unseen, undervalued, and ultimately betrayed. My father's corrections felt like guidance. My husband's actions felt like punishment for being naive. The difference is a chasm. One offered safety, the other destruction. Even in small things, the contrast is clear. My father called me just to check in, to make sure I had eaten or rested. My ex-husband disappeared emotionally, leaving me to navigate the challenges of our life alone. My father's love gave me confidence. My ex-husband's betrayal shook my trust in people. Yet the father's lessons remain, a silent map guiding me through the aftermath of heartbreak. Reflecting on this, I realized the depth of what I lost. Not the man my father warned me about, but the kind of relationship that could have mirrored the warmth and steadfastness he provided. And I feel a bittersweet gratitude, grief for what is gone, but clarity that my father's love prepared me to survive and even thrive despite betrayal. After the dust settled from the divorce, I found myself standing alone in what used to be our shared home, surrounded by memories that now felt like ghosts. The financial strain was suffocating. The prenup left me with almost nothing, and every bill, every decision, had to be faced alone. Initially, I felt paralyzed, wondering if I could ever trust anyone, or even myself, again. But slowly, I began to see fragments of resilience my father had always pointed out in me. I started by reclaiming small parts of my life. Morning routines became sacred, a way to anchor myself amid chaos. I joined a local book club, not just for the books, but for human connection and laughter I had long neglected. Therapy sessions became my weekly lifeline, where I could unravel the tangled threads of grief, anger, and lingering guilt. I learned that rebuilding wasn't about forgetting. It was about integrating lessons, protecting my own well-being, and letting go of the toxic patterns my ex-husband had enforced. One of the most profound moments came when I finally spoke honestly with friends about the betrayal, the divorce, and the empty promises. Their support reminded me that I wasn't alone and that vulnerability could coexist with strength. I started making plans for my career, pursuing passions that had been on hold, and imagining a future where my happiness didn't depend on anyone else. Every small victory, whether paying a bill on time, cooking a new recipe, or laughing freely, felt like a reclaiming of my life. Even in these moments of growth, my father's voice was there in spirit, his warnings, his guidance, his unconditional love shaping the choices I now made for myself. He had always prepared me for adversity, and now I could navigate it with clarity and courage. The betrayal I endured wasn't the end. It was a catalyst that forced me to recognize my own value and to refuse to settle for less than I deserved. This rebuilding phase taught me patience, self-compassion, and the art of setting boundaries. It was a slow, sometimes painful process, but with each passing day, I felt stronger, more grounded, and more capable of creating a life defined by my own choices rather than the mistakes of others. The future was uncertain, yes, but for the first time in a long while, it was mine. Sitting alone one evening, I found myself thinking about my father more than I had in years. The initial pangs of resentment I had felt as a rebellious teenager now felt almost laughable because the truth was undeniable. He had been right about so much. He had warned me about certain people, nudged me toward careful choices, and tried to instill a sense of caution that I often rejected with teenage defiance. I remembered the arguments, the raised voices, my cries of "don't interfere in my life." And now, each memory came with a bittersweet ache of recognition that I realized he hadn't tried to control me out of fear or dominance. He wanted only the best for me. He saw patterns, flaws, and potential disasters before they became visible to me, and he acted out of love, even when it felt intrusive. Now, after the betrayal and the divorce, I could see his wisdom clearly. The lessons he had tried to teach through patience, discipline, and occasional tough love were the very tools that allowed me to survive and start rebuilding my life. As I reflected, I also allowed myself to feel gratitude. Gratitude for the foundation he had laid, for the values he instilled, and for the subtle ways he prepared me for challenges I hadn't realized were coming. Even though he was gone, his influence lingered, shaping my decisions and giving me a lens to evaluate people and situations more clearly. I could now forgive my younger self for the anger and frustration I had directed at him, understanding that love sometimes looks like tough guidance. His wisdom wasn't just about relationships. It extended to how I approached life, work, and self-respect. I saw now that his warnings about my ex-husband were part of a larger pattern. He wanted me to recognize my worth and to refuse compromise where it wasn't deserved. The realization brought both sadness and relief. Sadness for his absence, but relief that his lessons hadn't been wasted. In honoring his memory, I could honor myself and make choices grounded in integrity, not fear or deception. For the first time in a long while, I felt a deep connection to him, not just as my father, but as a guide whose influence transcended life itself. His love, though often disguised as stern advice, had shaped me into someone capable of enduring betrayal, reclaiming autonomy, and embracing a future built on honesty, self-respect, and resilience. After the divorce and all the betrayals, trusting anyone again felt impossible. Every relationship I had entered afterward seemed to be measured against the betrayal I had suffered, and I constantly questioned motives, intentions, and hidden agendas. Simple gestures of kindness or affection were often met with skepticism, as my mind unconsciously sought out signs of deception. I had built walls around my heart, strong and high, convincing myself that this was the only way to protect what remained of my emotional well-being. Yet, gradually, I realized that living in constant suspicion was a form of imprisonment. My father's lessons echoed in my mind. Discernment was important, yes, but so was openness, courage, and the willingness to take calculated risks. I started small, allowing friends to support me, sharing pieces of my thoughts, and letting others in, cautiously but deliberately. Each small act of trust was a quiet rebellion against fear, and each successful interaction rebuilt fragments of my confidence in people that I also learned to trust myself. I began to honor my instincts, to recognize when someone's actions aligned with their words, and to spot patterns of deception early. The experiences with my ex-husband had honed my awareness, and combined with my father's guidance, I could now navigate relationships with clarity and self-respect. It was empowering to know that I could maintain compassion and empathy without compromising my boundaries. Slowly, I started to feel hope again. Hope that one day, I could experience love that was honest, mutual, and respectful. It wasn't an overnight process. It required patience, reflection, and constant self-checking. But with each day, the weight of past betrayals lightened, replaced by a sense of resilience and readiness for the right kind of connection. By the end of this period, I realized that trust wasn't a naive leap. It was a skill I could cultivate, just as my father had intended for me in his guidance. I was learning to engage with the world again, carrying forward both caution and courage, ready to embrace life without fear dominating my choices. By the time I faced the full truth about my husband's betrayal and the financial consequences of our divorce, I felt a mix of grief, relief, and clarity. The years of my father's guidance echoed in my mind, and I realized how right he had been about many things, not just about men, but about standing firm in life, making careful choices, and valuing self-respect. Despite the heartbreak and the feeling of loss, I found strength in knowing I would no longer live under deceit or compromise my dignity. I began rebuilding my life with a renewed sense of purpose, focusing on my career, passions, and personal growth. The memories of my father's advice became a source of wisdom and comfort, reminding me to trust my instincts and learn from past mistakes. I developed healthier boundaries and surrounded myself with people who genuinely cared for me, avoiding the toxic dynamics that had shaped my past. Though I grieved the love I thought was unshakable, I discovered that freedom, honesty, and self-respect were far more valuable than maintaining a broken marriage. In the end, I could smile at the thought that my father's love had guided me, even after he was gone, and I would carry his lessons forward. My life, though scarred by betrayal, became a testament to resilience, wisdom, and the enduring power of parental guidance. I finally felt ready to open a new chapter, one built on honesty, self-worth, and the lessons hard-earned through heartache.